awe is consistently induced by noticing the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Someone cares about you.
There's a reason why your heart is beating.
You still have a purpose.
Don't give up.
It's important to know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
You're not alone. You are not alone.
Taking a walk every day can energize your body and mind in numerous ways. That's why I urge you to walk while tuning into our interview with today's guest, Jess Quesada. After serving 8 years as a photojournalist in the Marine Corps, she founded LiboRisk, a travel community specifically designed for service members and veterans. Jess curates travel experiences that empower troops to discover life beyond the military and can be used as a powerful form of therapy. Jess, welcome to the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Danny. Excited to chat with you.
Absolutely. Well, it's been good getting to know you a little bit. And as our listeners begin their walk with the Strava app, tracking their progress, I'd love to learn more about your passion for adventure and travel. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, I was truly blessed with being raised by an adventurous grandmother who oftentimes would just make enough money to find ways to go on vacations and explore the world. It was a really cool thing to see at a young age because she taught me the importance of buying experiences, not buying possessions. But a lot of the things that she did bring back as possessions were small trinkets from all of these different countries that just really embodied like what that place was about. So I always became very curious at a young age and kind of took that with me throughout my time in the military and even afterwards.
That's really awesome that she really focused on these experiences and teaching you to pursue experiences over possessions. But what eventually inspired you to join the Marine Corps and pursue photojournalism in the Corps?
I was raised by a family of artists. My grandmother took me to museums and theaters and operas all the time. And then my mother was a framer. My father did ceramics and charcoal work. And so I just always had this creative outlet all around me from the people that I was living with. And I felt like I wanted to pursue something that was involved with visual arts, but I wasn't sure of what. So when I was younger, I found out about a really prestigious school in Dallas, Texas called Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts. A lot of the students go on to attend Juilliard and whatnot. Nora Jones went there. It's a pretty great school in terms of creativity. So I wanted to go there to pursue photography. And that was something that I just absolutely fell in love with. But I loved the aspect of storytelling in terms of photojournalism. You're coupling it with the real world and the stories of the people and the places here. So I wanted to pursue that, but I quickly realized that I didn't want to sit in a chair for the next 4 years. I wanted to go out and experience something. And the U.S. military is one big, fat, juicy experience. So I found out that the branches offer a photojournalism job, essentially, and in the Marine Corps, known as combat correspondents, or at least they were. It's changed over the years in terms of the types of stuff that they do for that specific job. But as a combat correspondent, it was essentially that, being a photojournalist, capturing through video and photography, writing the stories of those who serve and showcasing what the Marine Corps is about to the public. I just fell in love with it. So it was a really easy transition from the creative field as a young student into serving as a photographer and photojournalist.
No, that's really awesome that you were able to discover at a young age that you could couple your desire for photojournalism specifically and learn in a very non-conventional classroom, because the photojournalists that I've come across in the military, I mean, the school there in the Baltimore area, Fort Meade, DINFOS, really puts out some of the best journalists without having to go through a 4-year degree process and then doing internships. Like, you're just thrust right into the military. So what was your time serving the Marine Corps as a photojournalist like?
I think military journalism is underrated. There is such a robust amount of information and experience that we get. And contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that the U.S. military lies about things. I would refute that by stating that we don't lie, we just withhold. And understandably so, for many reasons, like, we can't tell all of our secrets. But when it comes to showcasing what we're about and being able to share the things that we can share, there's a lot of authenticity embedded in the way that we report that is not similar to civilian reporting nowadays. And I think a lot of people question the news. They have difficulty accepting some of the things that either are biased or unbiased opinions. And with the military, a lot of it is unbiased. We just have to present the facts. And ultimately, we're showcasing why we need a United States military in a lot of ways, which goes from the warfighting effort to humanitarian to philanthropic endeavors. Like, there's so many beautiful things about what we do as a U.S. military that are ignored. And I think being a U.S. photojournalist or a U.S. military photojournalist, there's a lot of authenticity to it. And that was something that I really enjoyed getting to see. And again, not having to sit at a desk for 4 years, I felt like I could go out and experience it. I could learn, I could fail, I could grow, and have the flexibility to just be in it without having the 4-year time frame to say I have a piece of paper, but I have no experience.
That's so true. And you had brought up the transparency of the military. I mean, we're required by our instructions to report very factually, non-biased, and we put it up there for all the world to see. And so, I mean, at the very beginning of your career, you are already putting your authentic self, your authentic writing and experiences out on the internet. How did these experiences further shape your passion for adventure and travel while you were still in service?
I had the awesome opportunity of being stationed in Iwakuni, Japan. And one of the key factors of reporting was connecting what the culture, like the local culture in Japan, what they were doing and how it not only impacted the service members, but what we were doing as a military base and how that was impacting the local people and the Japanese. So a lot of the cultural connections that we created, we got to cover. There were events that hosted the Japanese on our base. We have the largest air show in the Pacific that brings on thousands of Japanese to come see what the United States and our aircraft are all about at the air station. So it's just a really cool way that I got to see firsthand what beautiful aspects of the Japanese culture there are, and then how we were able to work together, two nations with obviously tumultuous past, and now serving alongside each other, both with a pursuit of safety and safeguarding our countries. I think it's a really cool thing to actually go there, live in that country, and then report about it and see it firsthand. So that was something that inspired me to not only love what I did as a Marine, but travel often throughout Japan to see more of the things that existed outside of the base. And a lot of people suffer from barrack syndrome, where they just get stuck in their room. They don't do anything outside of the barracks and they neglect to explore. And I mean, if you're stationed in another country, it's almost a shame to not go out and see more of what's going on in that area. So I was truly blessed to get that opportunity.
That's really cool that you were able to take advantage of that opportunity, not just professionally, but as a personal challenge to yourself to go out and see and experience a different culture, especially when you were given the gift of being stationed there. I know for myself, the early years of my military career specifically, a lot of the weekends were spent out at the bars or in the barracks rooms because we were training and exhausted and just didn't feel like really engaging. And what that did for us is a lot of us that were stationed out in Hawaii, we kind of started to develop a resentment for the island. And we frequently called it island fever because we thought, okay, we're at the beach, or okay, we're in the mountain, and now we're at the bar. And that was the extent of our experience. So did you end up being able to travel a little bit more while you were in the service?
I did. I spent every 96 that I could exploring Southeast Asia. My first solo backpacking trip was actually in Thailand. And it was one of the biggest mistakes that I made initially because I read my flight incorrectly. And that was when I quickly realized what a savings was for. I was slated to get foot surgery. And so I just had to make sure that I went on this trip. This was kind of a make it or break it moment where I didn't have an opportunity later on to go. So I spent $2,000 on a one-way flight from Japan to Thailand and spent the next days just having the best time of my life, really taking in and absorbing all of these adventures, from rock climbing in Krabi to bungee jumping in Chiang Mai and exploring temples, rice paddy trekking. There were so many things that just within a week, I was like in full saturation of that country, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I recognized that a lot of the things that I guess I was going through in the Marine Corps, I realized that my problems weren't that problematic in the grand scheme of things, because when you get outside your bubble and you kind of see what the rest of the world is working through or dealing with, I mean, man, what am I complaining about? I got a full belly and a roof over my head. I think that that was a really eye-opening experience, and it fueled a lot of the fire that came on later on to ensuring that I did travel more. And I went to Borneo, Malaysia, Indonesia. Later on in my last duty station, I was able to go to Portugal, Spain, Italy, just a few different places. So it fed a lot of that fire that inspired me to keep on exploring outside the military.
That's a really great aspect of travel, giving us perspective. I mean, I know that when we were driving around France, we consistently heard, and not just driving around, but we were living in France for a month this past year, and we had consistently heard prior to going there how rude people can be and how they viewed Americans in these different parts of the world. And that just was not our personal experience with it. We got to live in a small village where maybe two people actually spoke fluent English. So we really had to test our chops at our Duolingo app and try to speak the language as best we could. But to learn what they were going through, the types of things that they were learning in school, the challenges that they faced, and then the things that they celebrate really gives us a more full view of ourselves that I really wish that I would have developed more during my time in the Navy. What do you think your time in the Marine Corps left you with in terms of perspective after all of those travel adventures were done?
It helped me elevate my perspective of humanity. Again, the seeing that your problems are not that problematic is a big issue within the military community, because we feel overwhelmed from obviously the hardships that we endure as service members. And I don't want to negate the fact that there are difficulties. There's a lot of struggle in terms of the physical, mental impacts that happen putting on that uniform. But, and I emphasize the big old but, it ain't that bad. It ain't that bad. I mean, really, if you want to think about the major population of people who don't have fresh water, food, parasites full of in their stomach that if they eat, they'll get sick, that's the kind of thing that rings true to me in realizing we are living in a fully prosperous world on this side of the country, or in the Western side of the world. And again, I really struggle with empathizing with people who feel as if they have nothing while in the military. It's like, guys, gals, we have everything. And if you see that and adjust your perspective on what you actually have, then perhaps you will start to negotiate with the problems you think you have. And realize that in the grand scheme of things, we're so blessed. That perspective and that shift helped me create a plentiful amount of gratitude, and it helped me approach other people in life with so much more grace, especially when I travel, because I understand that their hardships are probably 10 times more than me. I won't even be able to understand some of the things that people go through in other countries. And, if you want to get down to the nitty gritty and the difficult, let's talk about being a woman somewhere else. That really sucks in some countries. And being, the 7% of women in the Marine Corps wasn't always easy, but I can say that it's definitely a lot easier some other places. So we shouldn't cease to strive to improve the environments in which we're in and like help the others that are in our communities. But by constantly looking towards the bad, then we will only see the bad. And traveling forces you to see the good that you have when you go back home. That's something that I think that we really need in the military community, is that consistent pursuit of gratitude for what we have on a regular basis.
That's such an excellent mindset to have. And I couldn't agree more about needing a more consistent pursuit of a mindset gratitude, because we do go through hard things, and, we're all at different growing points in our lives. But if we continue to look at things from a grateful lens, even the most difficult situations that we come through start to become more manageable. If we start meeting difficult situations with a negative mindset, it's only going to amplify that experience. I know towards the end of my career, it was a mixed bag of emotions. I had asked for help for drinking. I, at the same time, got diagnosed with PTSD, and that eventually led to the military no longer finding me suitable to serve a job that I absolutely loved doing. But I constantly had to look at it with gratitude of the resources that are available to me, even though things are still hard. It's not, hey, things are hard and there's nothing available. It's like, no, there are things available and it's hard, and that's okay to do. For your transition with your kind of newfound insight into the world and into yourself, how did you manage navigating your transition and starting to kind of reclaim your civilian life?
I had a really interesting transition. It was very atypical, especially because, one, of COVID, but I was going through an admin set process that made me feel as if, one, I knew I had nothing outside of the military. That was a big wake-up call. I didn't have anything or anyone to fall back onto. It was a come to Jesus moment of what am I going to do and how am I going to do it? So at the time, I co-owned a lumber company with a Marine Corps veteran, and I started looking at vans and buses just to have a place to live. Where can I survive post-military? And I found this big old beautiful bus and was able to convert it myself on a dime. And that helped me just propel forward with what I could. And I think that my transition was very incomparable to a lot of people's because, like I mentioned, COVID. But I also had a command where I worked completely alone. I was a marketing director for a recruiting station. I reported to the XO and the XO only. I had no peers, no true leadership, honestly. And so when I was going through this admin set process, my command was actually pretty supportive and just saying, hey, we understand that you don't know what's going to happen. This could be worst case scenario and you're left with nothing. Go figure your life out. Go do what you need to do. And we'll see you back here at the end of the year when the board is happening. So I did that. I worked 2 jobs, the lumber company, and then I worked on the weekends at a chiropractic office. And then I was grinding and pushing efforts on LiboRisk and trying to build this business as well. So there was a lot of difficulty in understanding where I was going to end up. And I think that rattled my bones quite a bit because a lot of people feel as if they don't have a sense of purpose once they take off that uniform. And I remember the last time I took off that uniform, and it was hard. It was really hard. But I will say that through my pursuit of building LiboRisk and maintaining connection to the military community, that has fed so much of my purpose and that generative drive to want to build, create, and impact the world is something that we're all looking for, especially veterans. Like, it is in our blood. We almost go crazy if we don't have that, right? But it's an intrinsic value of being a human. We just want to do good for the world. And I'm blessed with the fact that I happen to just fall into, I feel like I very much so fell into this. And whether it's God, unicorns, the tooth fairy, whatever designed my path, I'm on it and I'm riding this wave and couldn't be further from what I believe my true passion lies in.
Well, when I think about the person that you were as a child, the influences of arts that you had um, growing up from your parents, I mean, it seems like your current career path is just a marrying of your artistic desire, your desire to curate experiences over items. And so, you kind of tongue in cheek named, I feel like it's a tongue in cheek name for LiboRisk, because it's usually one of the briefs that Marines get on Friday is don't be that guy or gal, or, oh, that Marine's a LiboRisk, do not go out with them. What inspired you to actually start the company, and how'd you land on the name?
I love that question because it's like not a lot of people know about it, but when they do know. And for me, back in 2017, I was getting asked quite a bit on how I was going on all these trips all the time as an active duty service member. People were dumbfounded by the fact that one, I had the time, one, I had the money, or one, I was able to navigate the foreign clearance guide, which is a strenuous process to going to certain countries around the world, and a necessary process, right? If something happens, that is kind of your fallback in having that. But because of the inquiries I was getting, I realized that there was a major gap between a travel community and the existing military community. There was no sort of space for people to come together in both those realms and either share experiences, resources, tips, whatever it may be, despite being a travel community for every other type of subgroup, whether it's single moms who walk their dogs and travel to Italy, or people who love pasta. It's like there's a travel community for anybody and everyone, right? Except for us. So I wanted to create something that could, first off, just connect people virtually. And the Instagram and Facebook started taking off. So in 2020, this was actually the year I was transitioning out. And during my admin set period, I was in dire need of connection like everybody else during COVID. So I put together a morning of scuba diving. We had tacos and tequila at lunch, and then we went sea kayak in the afternoon. And it just was so much fun. A lot of people turned out. I was completely perplexed by the turnout. And everyone seemed to genuinely really have fun. They just didn't want the headache of planning stuff, which that's what I love doing, is planning trips and vacations. So through 2020 all the way up to 2023, I was in full experimentation mode, essentially. Just putting together these trips, single day, multi-day, weekend, our first out-of-state retreat to Alaska, and a lot of experimentation occurred, which was so much fun because I've honestly learned what I shouldn't do, which is a very big thing in business. But eventually I wanted to figure out, like, okay, what am I actually doing with this baby? And that's kind of where we've arrived at now, is solidifying the business model and who we are, our DNA, and what we thrive on. But in terms of the name, I wanted to use something that wasn't like military roamer or veteran adventurer, or something that like ties it like literally to the military, because again, the whole point is to get outside of that identity. And LiboRisk was a colloquialism that was termed in the Marine Corps specifically, and used kind of throughout the other branches as well, but definitely in the Marine Corps. So the Department of Defense uses the terminology leave and liberty to identify your vacation periods, your free times, right? So if you were a LiboRisk, or a LiboRisk for short, you were the one who had a knack for getting into sticky situations, whether it was reckless or it was risky. But either way, I was definitely a LiboRisk all of the time, bouncing around countries like Colombia, or I have friends who almost got ran over by a bison, and it's just like things like that happen. So the term really fixed well, and the thing that we're trying to shape in this community is our perspective around risk taking. There is a lot of aversion to being risky, and it's often misconstrued with recklessness, which these two things are not the same. In recklessness, there's a amount of stupidity involved, selfishness, gratification over doing something. But in riskiness, in order for something to be deemed a risk, there has to be some sort of reward. And that may be subjective, but usually the reward is a positive outcome. So if we can navigate the terrain of risk, veering from the emotionally vulnerable to the adrenaline pumping, that spectrum is massive and oh so rewarding if we're able to extract those things and really apply them to our lives in terms of what we get out of being a risky person. So those are the philosophical discussions that we dive deep into at our retreats in navigating our comfort zones and stretching those areas to see where do we want to take our lives next? Where can we push the limits thoughtfully, intentionally? And that's really been the bread and butter of how we're designing these experiences.
That's really awesome. I mean, as a former corpsman, I'm definitely very familiar with who our LiboRisks were. They were usually the guys that I saw on the side Saturday night because something went wrong. But how do you go about at LiboRisk going and promoting responsible risk taking? With especially like within these adventures that you're now including veterans of all ages as well as active duty military. Like there's varying degrees of risk that they're willing to take, whether it's climbing a mountain or backpacking through a canyon. How do you help mitigate those?
Risk mitigation is a part of any type of expedition planning, whether it's expedition planning or even just traveling to another country to try out the food. Like, if you eat someone else's food, you have a risk of getting food poisoning, but we don't look at it in that context, right? And it happens. I've been to Thailand puking my guts out. It sucks, but it's kind of a part of the an initiation to go into Southeast Asia. If you don't get food poisoning, you didn't have a good time. But risk mitigation is a huge conversation that we have. And I take an immense amount of responsibility in terms of ensuring that people are not only emotionally safe, but physically safe. Physical fitness is a core component of my life, not just for my overall mental health and well-being, but because I want to be in a position to respond in case of a crisis. I spent 2 months out in the backcountry in Northern Cascades of Washington with Outward Bound, becoming a certified outdoor educator because I wanted to understand what risk mitigation looked like in terms of basic risk and then serious risk. And there's some things, again, that vie on the side of recklessness. That's not something that we're shooting for as a community. There's no reward in that. What are you going to engage in that's going to stretch your comfort zone and that allows you to walk away from potentially unscathed, right? You might get a few bumps and bruises emotionally and physically, but that doesn't mean you're hurt, doesn't mean you're damaged, it doesn't mean you're dead, right? And that's the thing, is we definitely want to keep a safe environment, and risk mitigation is always a part of the conversation. And that's why I take being a facilitator very seriously, because if you're bringing people together in a gathering, you should have the expertise and know the art of what that means and what potential issues could arise if you're not creating a safety net for vulnerability. And our community in the military requires cautious scaffolding for that. A lot of cautious scaffolding. So there's just so much to consider. I could go through the roster of checklists that I have to identify in terms of safety, whether it's going to a foreign country like Panama in March, where we'll be at, to skiing and snowboarding next week. We actually have a gentleman who served in the Canadian Forces who is doing a winter bushcraft survival class for our participants. So it seems like it correlates, right? But one of the biggest things too is like, hey guys, think about it this way. If we're in the backcountry skiing or snowboarding and a crisis occurs, how are you going to stay warm? How are you going to create a fire? How are you going to maintain body heat and assist others? If you broke something, how are you going to maneuver yourself? All those conversations are coming up because they're realizing like, wow, this could actually happen. So again, it's a matter of like engaging in something that could feed the soul while also being cognizant of the issues that could arise.
That is so cool. And now my wife and I are sitting here trying to figure out, all right, how do we go do the winter thing? How do we go do Joshua Tree? How are we going to make Alaska work? You're constantly embracing and challenging yourself in many different ways. One of the challenges that you had faced was, moving into your bus, for example, as your full-time home and experiencing the risk and reward of that. Why do you think it's important to continue to push yourself? And why do you think other service members and veterans should also push themselves beyond the challenges of day-to-day life?
I know that the ways in which we can exercise the brain is not just through studying and reading, but through experiencing, right? We have this neurological response that occurs when we're exposed to unfamiliar settings with new scents, new sights, new sounds. And that's almost like it fires up the engine in our brain to start accepting new environments. And we're constantly, as creatures, scanning, judging, evaluating, determining, right? Based on what we're experiencing in that moment. And if we go through the mundane routine of our life with nothing that is novice, we lose a sense of wonder and curiosity that can greatly diminish our ability to be grateful and to be present, to love the life that we live in, right? And there's a great book called The Transformative Power of Awe that discusses how universal the emotion of awe is. And there's 8 natural wonders in which we experience awe. And it is a telling emotion of how people view themselves in the world. They start to understand like the bigger picture by experiencing awe. And awe is consistently induced by noticing the extraordinary in the ordinary. So for me, it's something that's a basic requirement. Our evolutionary species needs novice experiences. It needs us to stretch those comfort zones and to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, which we can do on a consistent basis. But through the challenges itself, I mean, look at the ways in which other people are inspired by our actions. Once they see us accomplish these feats, then they look in the mirror and question their capabilities and the possibilities that they may have for pursuing some sort of endeavor. And I think that we fail to neglect just how inspiring that our story can be. So it's a matter of testing our limits, sure, but it's also important to negotiate what we think is possible all of the time. And that's how we as a species have continued to thrive. And we will continue to thrive based on that logic, based on curiosity, wonder, the pursuit of experience that helps us grow.
That's really insightful and a great way to put it. The new experiences help us grow, continue to create a sense of awe and wonder in the ordinary. Because our experiences aren't just meant for us, but they're meant to be shared with other people. And unfortunately, either service members or veterans, once we're in this kind of environment, for some reason, we feel like our new experiences are over. We've done the most dramatic, adrenaline pumping thing that we can do, and we want no more part of it. And so we fail to continue to push our limits, or we felt like we hit the epitome of who we were. It's kind of like looking back on ourselves and going, well, those were the good old days, instead of, hey, I have so many more good days ahead of me. And so, what are some of the challenges do you consider military service members and veterans face when looking at the opportunity of travel?
I think people just need to get out of their head and be financially more responsible. The concern with cost seems to be an issue that arises consistently as we do surveys and monitor what people's perspectives are on affording travel. And I see a lot of service members and veterans spending their money on stupid things that they don't need. I mean, really, we have an abundance of stuff. It was so wild to come back from the 2 months under the tarp with Outward Bound to my bus and look in my closet and be like, this is too much. Like, this is way too much. That was very eye-opening to me. And I'm like, what do we need all this crap for, dude? Just get rid of it. Find ways to downsize, decrease your expenditures, and you can go do whatever you want. The world is cheap if you make it. So I think it's really just people getting out of their own heads saying that I can't, and then not allowing themselves to negotiate with their comfort zone in their possessions and their current lifestyle that's prohibiting them from actually going out and traveling more. There's a lot of anxieties, obviously, around perhaps being on planes, going to a foreign country, interacting with cultures that are very disparate from our own, especially in the Middle East, perhaps, that is current to the members of global war on terrorism and who experience that. And that's something that I think is definitely a little bit more complex to discuss. But in terms of the baseline, it's just a matter of saying yes to it. Like, just go. And it doesn't have to be some extravagant trip in a month in Southeast Asia. Take a weekend off, take a week off, experience life outside of the military, outside the uniform. And that's just the single step. That's how you stoke that fire.
Yeah, I remember I was 34 years old the first time that I got a passport. It was also the first time that I took a vacation that wasn't just going home for leave and visiting family. We had gone to Australia. We went for 3 weeks. It was my gift to myself for graduating college after I got out of the service. And then later that year, we had an opportunity to go compete in a martial arts tournament in London. So I was really surprised that had happened. And, when we were starting this podcast in the beginning of 2022, the plan was to give it at least 2 years. And part of the reason that we wanted to give it 2 years was because we know that it takes a long time for things to get out there, especially any new business venture. And the money that we were using to seed this was only going to last so far, which is why we actually decided to hit the road and travel full time for 2 years. And I'll say that first month into it was really, really hard. But by the third month, I was really shocked with myself because I ended up in Egypt. We took about a week to plan it. Yeah, I was in Egypt. We planned it in a week. We were coming from Greece. And it was the most therapeutic experience ever. We were driving 8 hours into the desert with a driver that did not speak English, encountering armed guards along the way. We couldn't hold on to our passport because they just kept giving it to checkpoint after checkpoint. And it was the most therapeutic experience ever because my wife and I just both felt so safe riding through the desert in this Arabic country. And I am one of those veterans of the war in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan. And I got so much healing out of it. Never imagined that I would be able to return to a place like that and feel comfortable and loved and cared for by the people that were there in the country too. And so I know firsthand, I believe that travel not only gives us empathy towards other countries, but can really teach us a lot about ourselves. Have you seen with your community, have you seen similar types of growth? And what do you expect to continue as you continue this journey of LiboRisk?
It's so profound to see people who've gone out on our retreats and who begin to tackle life afterwards. There's one gentleman, Medina, he, after he went on one of our trips, it's just I don't see him ever home. He's always on the go. He's always exploring. And that didn't seem like a norm to him beforehand. A lot of others who continue to come back to our retreats come back because they know they're getting an experience that will help them grow. And I think that it's going to continue to ignite that fire. There's a really awesome quote by Marianne Williamson. The end of it, she's like, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And that's the kind of impact that we're having, that's spearheading others to get service members and veterans outside to do things. And so there's a serious butterfly effect that we're kind of seeing here. I just hope that, it can outlive me. And that's one of the hardest things in building any business, is figuring out, how you construct a business so that it can have serious longevity while maintaining the ethics and the DNA that you've built so hard to construct. I never want anybody to mess with that. What we have is really pure and authentic. There's no fluff. I'm not a fluffy person. I'm very straight to the point. My aunt told me at one point, she's like, Jess, you're the type of person that somebody really has to love in order to like. And I was like, that's so true. It's so true. Because I just don't have time for bullshit. I'm very straight to the point type of person. And I think that that's what the community is about. Like, as LiboRisk, we're to the point guys and gals who just say, screw it. This is it. And it may not start out like that for each person who comes in the community. They may feel incredibly anxious and unaligned with our values, but they come to find the beauty in it. And they see that even just our community ethos of being receptive, respectful, and risky, that is a baseline for how you just be a good human being. Just how you have a good time. That's really what it's all about.
That's really amazing. I hope that the butterfly effect continues. I know what travel has done for me this past year. And, it's really funny because it's brought me to a place where I never imagined. I grew up, lived in a few trailer parks as a kid, didn't grow up with a stable house, and I never imagined some of the stuff that I would be able to do post service, especially with what doctors were telling me when I first got diagnosed with PTSD and depression, that I was going to have to face struggles. And I know a lot of veterans and military members and people out in the world face a lot of struggles to the point where we are just dealing with too many suicides throughout our country and the world. And I would just like to ask you, Jess, what message of hope would you like to extend to somebody that's currently battling with their own struggles?
The 24-hour cycle that is required to maintain a healthy mind, body, and spirit doesn't stop. And it requires a lot of maintenance. The ability to work on that consistently and enjoy this process that we call life, and trust in the fact that things happen. Life happens for us. It doesn't happen to us. It's a hard thing to wrestle with. And being somebody who suffered with alcoholism for a long time, I crashed my car into a tree, had to go through AA and the 12 steps and all that stuff. Even the difficulties are an aspect of the journey. I love Stoicism. It's a philosophy that I took on during my time getting out of the Marine Corps and the transition that I had, which was very difficult. And I think Stoicism time and time again just tells us that we're always going to have to wrestle with the difficult parts, but that's what makes us human. And trying to find others who authentically share those struggles is a good way to connect with people. So I want people to understand that I'm not trying to use travel as this end-all be-all cure, but its ability to enhance our perspective is something that's really profound. And I find great gratitude in that. And I feel like others do too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that message, Jess. And with everything that you're doing, I want people to be able to reach you and follow your community. So where can people find and connect with you and LiboRisk?
Sure. We are on the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We have a website that's pretty robust with a lot of resources on there. And especially for people who are looking for military recreational nonprofits in their area that offer free programs and retreats. That is something that we have a robust list of. But yeah, our Facebook is really active, and our Instagram, we're constantly sharing travel stories of those who serve. So you can find us on any type of social media.
Awesome. Well, Jess, I really appreciate your time here today on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Thanks for having me, Danny. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your support. This is it's awesome to get to share what I do, and I don't feel like I work a day in my life. So thank you.
That's amazing. And for our listeners out there, please make sure to follow the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, ready for you on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.